because they part of the civilian population by day, and they could be the Viet Cong at night. You know, they could be your enemy, and you didn't know who was who, and it became. There was a time when there was bounties on Viet Cong killing soldiers could get paid extra money. So I was called a lieutenant as a Dai Wei, and there was money being offered for killing Dai Weis, so I stopped traveling around as much and pretty much stayed closer to my home base and did the work that was required there.
So you said you tested fuel storages?
Yeah.
What exactly?
I was trained as a
petroleum officer, right?
officer, and we, you know, the Army runs on mechanized equipment and it all uses petroleum, and the Air Force and Marines, Navy, we all use the principal product that we tested was jet fuel, and it was required for the helicopters, and in our area we were also testing for, at that time, the Navy and the Marines were there, and so we were largely looking for anti-icing additives to make sure the fuel doesn't coagulate at the high temperatures that they operate at 30,000 feet, 35,000 feet, where it's way below zero. You know, the fuel has to keep flowing, and there's additives that they're put in it for that. And then we had to make sure it met military specifications, that it was on grade, that it would meet certain performance characteristics. A big part of my job was to, we were receiving refined petroleum products from the Persian Gulf. It would come over in big tanker ships, mostly aviation gasoline, 115, 145 octane, and jet fuel, JP4 is what we called it back then. Very similar to Jet A or kerosene, and motor gasoline for trucks and whatnot, and diesel fuel for the deuce and a halves and 5 tons. But the gasolines and diesel fuel didn't require that much quality surveillance, but the jet fuel was pretty critical and it had to be stored and handled properly. So we had to test this stuff before it was taken off, pumped off the ship into our storage tanks, and we had to make sure it was on grade, met specification, and then we had to make sure it was stored properly and distributed properly and all that sort of, and you know, occasionally mistakes would happen. Like there was a Marine refueling a big piston engine, like a Super Constellation Lockheed, one of these giant, it used to be a passenger plane that had these triple tails, big plane, and he mistakenly filled it up with JP4 instead of aviation gasoline, and fortunately it didn't crash, but it was about to lift off the runway when the fires went out, and the pilots just barely got it stopped, and we had to go and test every fuel storage facility within hundreds of miles to make sure that they all had the right fuel in there that they said that they had in there. So that sort of thing.
So you got a lot of background training for this job? Yeah,
I learned a little bit about pipelining and you know, the process of refining fuel and storing fuel and lubricants and all sorts of things. Got pretty good training out of the Army.
Did it help you later when you got back home?
It actually did. I walked into a very good job after the military, working for a pipeline company in Chicagoland that was delivering refined products from the refineries in Gary, Indiana, all the way up to O'Hare Airport and up to Madison, Wisconsin. So it led to a really nice job. So I really can't regret my military training or experiences. I got to see it, the issues of our time up close, and got to form my own opinions about it, and I survived, which was fortunate because towards the end we were getting rocketed a lot.
So where were you initially stationed when you first went to Vietnam, and what were your initial reactions?
I first came into a huge supply area called Cam Ranh Bay, which is sort of in the middle of the country, and it was a big port that could handle large ships, and they built a huge airport there with 18-inch thick runways and whatnot, many thousands of feet long. And I was there for quite a few months, and I was very unhappy there because it was highly regulated and very controlled by the high-level executives and generals, and it was sort of like being in a war zone, but it was still like being in the United States Army bases, where you had to shine your shoes and wear freshly starched uniforms and fall out for parades and do all this extraneous stuff that had nothing to do with the job you had to do. So I didn't like it there, but fortunately after a few months in Cam Ranh Bay, I was given a mobile unit, a mobile laboratory, and told to take it all up to several hundred miles north in a more active combat area called I Corps up near Da Nang, and Chu Lai was my duty station. There was another big supply center in Chu Lai, and I was stationed in at that time, the Navy and the Marines were the most active forces in I Corps, and the Marines were quite worn out and dispirited from being there so long and holding forces. The Marines are used to getting in on the beaches, making a strike, and getting back out. Well, in Vietnam, they became stationary for quite some time up in I Corps, and they were wearing out their equipment and their morale and everything else. And the time I was there was transitioning, an Army division called Americal was coming in to relieve all the Marine forces, and the logistics for the Marines was mostly being provided by the Navy. So when I was sent up to Chu Lai, I was still in the Army, but I was taken care of by the Navy. I was living with in the Navy tank farm and doing a lot of support work for the Navy and the Marines and the Army forces in the area. And that was a huge transition from Cam Ranh Bay. All of a sudden, all we had to do, I was sent up with my laboratory, a couple of big trucks and a Jeep and generator set and whatnot, and then all of a sudden I was on my own. There were no bosses looking over my shoulder. We just had our job to do, and we were on the beach and on the South China Sea in a big Navy tank farm that had all these bolted steel storage tanks in it that most of them had jet fuel and aviation gasoline, that sort of stuff. And right across the road was the Marine Air Group, which was a runway that was operating Hueys and Chinooks and Phantom fighter jets and A-4 fighter jets. And just a couple of kilometers down the road from the Navy tank farm was the ammunition dump, the big ammo dump. So we were kind of in prime real estate for attacks, and when the Tet Offensive began, it was the full moon of January 1968, all of a sudden we were getting hit almost every night for a while with 122 millimeter Katyusha rocket rounds that were being fired from the mountains into our facilities. And I spent many a night in the mortar pit hoping that we wouldn't get a direct hit. And saw a lot of stuff get blown up, but more or less I survived. And the attacks, the Tet attacks, were actually a big defeat. And the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese didn't gain anything strategically, but they had a huge moral victory because of the fact that our leadership was telling everybody that we were winning the war and body counts were going up and it would be over before long. And then all of a sudden here's this huge offensive countrywide against the United States forces and the Vietnamese forces. And it's just like all people back home just saw, holy cow. I think a lot of what they're telling us is BS. And this war's not going the way we thought it was going to go. So I think that was a big turning point in the way Americans